This BBC podcast is supported by ads outside the UK.
We got a call from the bank and said, "Are you aware that there's no funds in this account?"
A string of victims across the US, stretching from coast to coast.
The amount of victims in such a short time was unbelievable.
Real people losing real money, but the criminals are ghosts.
The anger, the frustration, the fear.
From the BBC World Service, this is Evil Corps.
The story of a cybercrime case that stretches from small-town America to the backstreets of Moscow.
Listen now. Search for Cyberhack wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the History Hour from the BBC World Service with me, Max Pearson. The past brought to life by those who were there and have appeared this week on Witness History on the BBC World Service. Coming up, under attack from President Trump, we look at the origins of USAID.
The question which began to be discussed on my visit to Washington in 1961 was it at all in the American national interest?
Plus the team that eventually found the wreck of the Titanic and the first woman to give birth after a womb transplant.
Little Vince was out quickly, screamed, and we were very happy. And I feel privileged to be part of this process.
That's all coming up. But first, we're going to what is now Myanmar, but which was known as Burma during the Second World War. And it was in that Burmese theatre of war that an unconventional special force was created to help the Allies confront the Japanese army. Jill Kersley tells the story using recordings from the BBC archive, and this item contains outdated and offensive language.
Here they are, for the first time in newsreels, the Chindits. Take a close look at them. Not that it'll help you to recognize any of them, their own mother couldn't.
Named after the lion-like figures guarding Burmese temples, their leader describes them as a long-range penetration group. Entirely independent, with mules for transport and silver rupees for pay, and prove that a large force can fight in the jungle without communications.
The Chindits fought behind enemy lines in northern Burma, now Myanmar, during 1943 and 1944 in the war against Japan. The British feared the Japanese getting a foothold in Burma that would lead to an invasion of neighbouring British-ruled India. The leader of the Chindits was the charismatic Orde Wingate, a British Army officer who was eventually given the title Major General. He was a controversial historical figure. This recording of him from 1943 comes from the BBC archives.
What was it then that made these ordinary, typical troops, born and trained for the most part to factory and workshop, capable of feats that would not have disgraced Tarzan, and able on many occasions to punish all enemy attempts at interference with a vigour that caused him to draw off and hesitate to come again?
And keep listening to find out what the answer is. The Chindits leader was said to be a very unusual character.
Wingate was definitely an eccentric, but in spite of his smallness and his stoop, he was tough and vigorous. He spoke abruptly and to the purpose, fixing you as he did so with those fierce eyes.
That's one of his colleagues, A.P. Ryan, and here's an anecdote from journalist Leonard Mosley.
The first time I met him, he was lying on his bed in his hotel room, stark naked. He was brushing some rather delicate parts of his body with a toothbrush, and he was eating onions. He maintained that if you ate at least half a dozen onions a day, not much harm was likely to come to you.
Wingate had led controversial operations elsewhere and has been criticised for his leadership of a military unit during the 1930s Arab revolt in the British Mandate for Palestine. Here he describes how the Chindits came about.
The Japanese thought that they had found a technique of warfare in the jungles of the Far East to which the United Nations had no answer. They had not only studied the effect of jungle of all types on modern tactics, but had also trained large numbers of their best troops in the practical application of their approved methods. They boasted that the self-indulgent and ignorant troops of the United Nations would never equal them either in skill or endurance. But they were mistaken.
In autumn 1942, Wingate was given the task of recruiting and training a special force in commando methods and preparing them for jungle fighting and sabotage.
Chindits. That's the name for the guardian statues that stand at the steps of Burmese pagodas. A name from legend that's become flesh and blood. Living guardians of Burma's safety.
Wingate worked with British Army officer Archibald Wavell on developing the unit.
Essential to Wavell's plan was air power, not only superior to that of the enemy, but capable of operating in new ways and fulfilling hitherto unheard of demands. We had such air resources, and the RAF never failed us. In fact, seeing in us an ideal opportunity of driving home their own strategic attacks on the enemy, they supplied RAF contingents for every column, commanded by officers until recently fighting the enemy in the air. And it was largely the presence and work of these RAF elements that made the operation a success. Let us consider for a moment the composition of the force that was to enter the heart of Japanese-occupied Burma and singe the Mikado's beard. It was not composed of selected troops. It consisted of ordinary British and Indian infantry, sappers, signalmen, and others. Each column had its quota of Burmese troops, without which these operations would have been impossible.
So earlier, Wingate posed the question about why, considering they were all ordinary men, they were capable of unusual feats. Well, this is how he saw it.
The answer to this question is that given imagination and individuality in sufficient quantity, the necessary minimum of training will always produce junior leaders and men capable of beating the stereotyped and unimaginative Axis soldier. Although incapable of the sombre and humorless self-immolation of the Japanese, the British soldier can nevertheless beat him on his own chosen ground, provided he gives scope to his greater intellectual powers and stronger and saner character.
The first of the Chindits expeditions, an experimental operation into Burma, was codenamed Operation Longcloth and took place in 1943.
While all that it accomplished cannot be revealed, this much can be said. Early in February, we crossed the River Chindwin, across which the British and Japanese forces faced each other, distracting the enemy's attention by a successful feint and pressing on through Japanese-occupied territory towards the north and south railway line. Throughout the operation, the force never occupied a space of less than 10,000 square miles.
The Chindits in this case consisted of a specially trained force of British, Gurkhas and Burmese who've just done an amazing job in Burma. Penetrating over 300 miles into Japanese-occupied Burma, crossing the Chindwin and the Irrawaddy, they cut the Mai China railway in 80 different places. They drew off a Japanese division from the Chinese. They also brought hope to loyal Burmese. The force withdrew after 3 months of brilliant success under the command of Brigadier Wingate.
Most of us are back and waiting to renew our experience of this dull, ferocious and poverty-stricken little army at the earliest possible moment. Some of us will never come back. They have done something for their nation. They have demonstrated a new way in war, the combination of the oldest with the newest means. They have not been thrown away.
Although this first expedition wasn't seen as hugely successful, it proved British forces could operate in the midst of Japanese-controlled territory. The second Chindit expedition led by Wingate, codenamed Operation Thursday, in March 1944, was on a much larger scale. Once inside Burma, well-defended strongholds were established.
Approaching a village, they prepare for action. They look casual. It's the Japs that look worried.
Wingate was killed a few weeks after the launch of this operation.
This brilliant officer has lost his life in a plane crash, all too soon in a campaign that is crammed with hazards. We mourn his loss, but we know that his teaching will bear fruit in due course. These are the men of the long-range penetration group. Their fighting behind the enemy lines in Burma has made them a name throughout the world. That is the epitaph for Charles Ord Wingate.
His colleagues remembered him as a driving force.
He was one of the few people I've met who really could truthfully be summed up in the old phrase, a fiery particle.
Orde Wingate is remembered for his time as leader of the Chindits, and for some, his controversial military service around the world. A final word from Brigadier Mike Calvert.
I'd like to stress that 99% of us Chindits are ordinary people, ordinary soldiers, not hand-picked. Weeded, if you like, by hard training, weeded of those who can't stand up to the physical conditions. But in no other way are we picked troops.
Jill Kersley, using the BBC archives to remember the Chindits and their commander, Orde Wingate. My own father, as a young man, was part of the RAF contingent that went behind Japanese lines in Burma during that campaign in the Second World War, and so he was part of the proof that a new and unconventional way of fighting in hostile terrain was possible, long-range, lightly armed and supplied from the air. Lucy Betteridge-Dyson is a military historian and is with us now. How radical was Wingate's idea?
It was quite radical, although irregular warfare, guerrilla fighting, this idea of people fighting behind the lines, highly mobile, had been around for centuries, essentially. But to use it in this context was certainly quite a radical new thinking thing for the British Army in Burma.
So were the Chindits inspired then by other examples of fighting techniques from history? And can you give us a couple?
Yeah, definitely. I'd like to start, actually, before we go a little bit further back, I'd like to start with another one from the Second World War, but one that's much less well known of, and it's in the Philippines, around about the same time as the Chindits, actually, in 1941, when the Philippines were invaded by the Japanese. Guerrilla groups began to sprang up all over the place, formed by the local population, civilians. They ambushed patrols, sabotaged railways and supply lines, so very similar work to the Chindits were aiming to do in Burma. And the most aggressive of these was the Huk Balahap, or the Huk, and they were really formed by sort of networks of civilians who fought from jungle bases. And what was really interesting about them is that women played a really important role. They first started working as nurses and sort of supporters of the men that were fighting in the Huk, but soon they began to take on active roles as couriers, propagandas, and even fighters themselves. So, you know, that was a really unusual thing for women to be doing, fighting on the front line, essentially, during the Second World War in Asia. And there was one famous lady who I love, and this is why I wanted to mention them, called Commander WWII. And she was actually a Filipino beauty queen before the war, but her father was captured by the Japanese. He was tortured and executed, and this really kind of set a fire in her to join the resistance. And she was known for going into combat with the Japanese, wearing lipstick, painted nails, perfectly styled hair, and she would make the men that she commanded wait for her while she prepared for her fighting. And she was an incredible markswoman.
And of course we can go further back in history and look at other examples of what you might call similar ways of fighting.
Definitely. So one that comes to mind, a few decades before the turn of the century, we could look at the Second Boer War in South Africa. And the Boers who were fighting against the British had no standing army. They did have a militia system, so they mustered local civilians. And they were not trained soldiers, but these men brought with them their own set of skills. So many of them were rugged frontiersmen. They were skilled horse riders, exceptional marksmen, and they provided their own rifles and ponies usually when they joined up these militia groups. And this is where the term commandos, so we were familiar with this in the Second World War, so this is another example of irregular forces, but that's where the name comes from, the Boer commandos. And they quickly realised that they couldn't win set-piece battles against the much larger British forces. And so they carried out attacks in rear areas, targeted railways to try and defeat the British by messing up their supply lines.
So the common themes are that these groups would be relatively small, relatively lightly armed, but they knew their own territory and were able to move quickly. But they weren't. The thing perhaps different about the Chindits is that they were organised into an official unit of the British Army.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the difference. When you look back in history, much of the kind of guerrilla fighting is formed unofficially by civilians and local groups. A final example for you that kind of speaks to that is if we go back to the 17th and 18th century in the Caribbean, and we can look at the Maroons. And these were communities formed by people of African descent who had escaped slavery in the Americas. And they formed communities in the mountains and waged a really long guerrilla war against the British colonial troops. And so they were, using what knowledge they had of the areas. And again, it's all about mobility, it's about terrain, and it's about resourcefulness to kind of turn weakness into strength, essentially, and offset these sort of overwhelming odds of big organised forces against them.
That's the military historian Lucy Betteridge Dyson. From the world of warfare, we turn next to the world of aid. Earlier this year, President Donald Trump ordered a freeze on the funding of USAID, the United States Agency for International Development. So what exactly is it, and how did it come about? Surya Elango has been finding out.
Today, the story of one woman's influence on the founding of USAID. I'm bringing her story to you through recordings made in the 1960s from the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum. It's June 1962. We're in the White House Rose Garden in Washington, D.C. President John F. Kennedy has called a meeting with 38 overseas mission workers at the Agency of International Development.
Let's see, how many of you are new in the government service in the last few months? About 30, sir. If we go around, you could tell me where each of you are going. Here's the start here.
Indonesia, Mr. President.
Yemen. Kenya. Kenya.
Korea. Ghana. Libya. Chile.
I wish all of our fellow Americans could listen to the litany of the countries to which you're going, all of them far away, many of them countries about which most of us knew very little 2 decades ago, or even in the case of some of them, a few years ago.
It's been 9 months since the USAID bill was signed on the 4th of September 1961 to bring all existing aid work under one single agency.
Aid, the concept of foreign assistance, is not a popular program in the United States. That is a well-known fact, and therefore there will not be farewell parades to you as you leave or parades for you when you come back.
JFK thought the program essential to the beginning of what he envisioned as a decade of development.
The people who are opposed to aid should realize that this is a very powerful source of strength for us. It permits us to exert influence for the maintenance of freedom. And as we do not want to send American troops to a great many areas where freedom may be under attack, we send you to try to work with them in developing the economic thrust of their country so that they can solve their problems without resorting to totalitarian control and becoming part of the bloc. That's the issue.
It's the time of the Cold War, pitting the communist Eastern Bloc against the capitalist West. Aid to the developing world is seen as an essential weapon of soft power.
It is a burden, but far less than the burden that would be involved to us directly if we did not have this program. So that I hope that you have the satisfaction of realizing how significant this effort is to protect the security of the country. So we're particularly glad to have you here at the White House.
It wasn't just these mission workers travelling far afield. JFK was too, and this was 17 years earlier. Remember I mentioned the woman who influenced the founding of USAID? Well, we're about to meet her in London, just as she's about to meet a young JFK, fondly known by his family and friends as Jack.
It was in the middle of the 1945 general election, and President Kennedy's sister, Kathleen, was an acquaintance of mine, and she said, "My young brother Jack just wants to see something of the electoral campaign. Please, can you do anything about it?"
That's Barbara Ward. She's later known as Baroness Jackson and is a pioneering British economist and journalist. She's the kind of person that ends up in everybody's address book, from prime ministers, presidents, and even the Pope.
Well, as it happened, that night I was going out to talk for Herbert Morrison in Wandsworth, in Lambeth, I think it was.
Herbert Morrison is in the midst of organising Labour's 1945 election campaign, which will be a landslide victory.
And so it was arranged that Jack should pick me up, and we all crowded into a tiny little Austin 7. And out we went to Lambeth. That was my first meeting.
In Barbara, JFK immediately recognises he's met a powerful political ally and an advisor he wants to keep by his side. One of the first countries that was the focus of USAID was the newly independent West African nation of Ghana, for the building of the Volta River Project, an ambitious and expensive plan for the hydroelectric Akosombo Dam. It so happened that Barbara was living in Ghana at the time. The country's Prime Minister and President, Kwame Nkrumah, often sought her advice. She was travelling frequently to meet leaders of newly independent nations in Asia and Africa, and travelled to the US, where she'd see JFK.
Well, the next visit was 1961. The whole report, all the sort of situation papers on the scheme for the Volta River Dam were pretty well ready. They were completed, the scheme had been declared economically and commercially feasible, but from 1960-61 onwards, Dr. Nkrumah had started yet another round of flirtation with the Eastern Bloc, had gone off and got the red carpet treatment in Russia, and was locking up quite a number of his opposition, and was beginning to show totalitarian tendencies, and surrounding himself, not completely, but to some extent, by people with strong Eastern sympathies. So the question which began to be discussed on my visit to Washington in 1961 was it at all in the American national interest to go ahead with what would in fact be not aid, because it was all on commercial terms, but nonetheless a pretty big dedication of capital to a scheme which outside an aid context probably wouldn't be done.
Barbara contributed foreign aid ideas to prime ministers and presidents. Her modus operandi? Handwritten notes. It's believed she never used a typewriter or computer. Barbara sent many letters and notes to JFK on the mercurial issue of Nkrumah and the Volta decision. The subject matter: some of the USAID programs were coming under scrutiny, so Congress was putting pressure on JFK. Should or should not the US go ahead with giving the equivalent of some $50 million a year over 5 or 6 years to Ghana?
Dear Mr. President, I would be less than candid if I did not admit that the Volta decision is a risk and a bet. But may I give you the reasons why I think, on balance, that the bets favour a decision to go ahead. I believe we shall throw away our only major card in Africa. I pray that with all your vast powers of influence and persuasion, you will rally the 21st century to rout the Neanderthals. I'm certain you can do it. I'm certain our whole future depends on your success.
And by the end of 1961, there's this letter from JFK.
Dear Lady Jackson, your recommendations were influential in the matter. We have put quite a few chips on a very dark horse indeed, but I believe the gamble is worthwhile.
With Barbara's persuasion, construction of the Volta River Project began. Today, it provides 85% of the country's electricity. She reflects on being a close advisor to JFK. She never held an official position.
I don't think he would have felt happy in a team that had included women at an operating level. I mean, the fact is there were none. So I think that I never felt that people of my type would ever have very much influence or play very much part, you know? We swallow our disappointment as best we may, yes.
In the year 2000, Baroness Barbara Jackson was named by Time magazine as one of the most influential people of the 20th century. She died aged 67 in 1981. Her story was told by Surya Elango using recordings from the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum.
Hi, I'm Simon Jack.
I'm Zing Sing.
And Good Bad Billionaire is back for a new season.
Delving into the lives and livelihoods of more of the world's billionaires.
Like the owner of Russia's largest online retailer, Wild Berries. She's Russia's first self-made female billionaire, Tatiana Kim.
The action movie icon and former governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
And the co-founder of Snapchat, a billionaire at just 25 years old, Evan Spiegel.
Simon and I are asking you to decide if they're good, bad, or just another billionaire.
That's Good Bad Billionaire from the BBC World Service.
Listen now wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Still to come, a medical breakthrough for women who thought they could never have children, and the shaky start to the hugely successful resale website Vinted.
We even forgot to develop the button, I want to buy this item. My friends, they're texting me and they're saying, but this is just a catalog to watch? If I want to buy, how can I buy them?
Before that, though, the Titanic. The sinking of the great ocean liner on her maiden voyage in 1912 has gone down in history as one of, if not the, most famous seafaring disaster. It's been a source of seemingly endless fascination, and for years there were countless efforts to try to find the wreck. It was finally discovered 40 years ago. Luis Hidalgo spoke to two of the explorers who found it.
It's just after midnight on the 1st of September 1985, and the North Atlantic Ocean is icy calm. Research scientist Kathy Offinger has just gone to bed. She's part of a French-American expedition searching for the remains of the lost ship, the Titanic.
I could hear some commotion out in the hallway and realized that something was going on, and somebody came bursting into each of the cabins to just call out, "We found it, we found it." I don't think there was a person asleep on the ship after that moment. We all tried to cram into what we call our control vans to see the live video images, and it was just an unforgettable moment to realize what we had just done.
What the expedition, led by the ocean explorer Robert Ballard, had found was the greatest lost wreck in history, the Titanic, which had lain undisturbed since sinking there with the loss of more than 1,500 lives 73 years earlier. That night, the co-chief scientist on the expedition, the French oceanographer Jean-Louis Michel, was watching the video pictures being beamed up from the ocean floor, 4,000 metres below, when he began to see big black patches on the sea bottom, then floating bits of debris, shiny pieces, which he later realised were bits of crockery.
The shiny pieces came certainly from debris of porcelain or dishes or whatever, I don't know. And very fast, let's say a few minutes later, we saw some pieces of metal.
Did you know at that stage, or at what point did you realise that this was the Titanic?
No, not at this time. 2 minutes after, there was bigger and bigger pieces of metal. And let's say 5 minutes after, we have just in front of our screen the image of a boiler of the last century, the beginning of the last century. And we know by the boilers that the wreck was the Titanic.
By the time I got up there, we were over the big parts of the hull. The first images that really confirmed that it was the Titanic were the big boilers from the engine room with a very distinctive pattern of the bolts welded into the top of these big boilers. And we had a lot of historical data with us, photographs and ship's plans, and somebody had quickly dug up one of the photos of the boilers and held it up next to the video monitors, and they were the exact same items.
Can you describe what you felt? What was the overriding feeling?
I distinctly remember standing out on deck. It would have been about 2 a.m. at this point. Obviously, it's dark. It's the middle of the night. And I just was looking in the water, thinking about everything, and then it just hit me that right beneath us, right where I was looking, below us was where the ship was resting, and all of a sudden all these thoughts came flooding in about what had happened on this surface of water. It was quite an overwhelming emotion to realize that we were as close to the wreck as anybody had been in the previous 70 years.
In an extraordinary coincidence, it had been at that same time, around 2 o'clock in the morning, that the Titanic had sunk on that same spot all those years earlier. The Titanic had been the largest, most luxurious ship of her age, and in the popular imagination of the time, she was unsinkable. But just after midnight on April the 15th, 1912, the Titanic struck an iceberg, and all the latest technology, like a double hull, couldn't save her. Frank Prentice was a storekeeper on board the ship.
All of a sudden she came to a halt. There was no impact.
as such. It was just like jamming your brakes on a car. And that was that. She stopped. We had a porthole open, and I looked out, and the sky was clear, the stars were shining, the sea was dead calm. Of course, what had happened, we'd slipped over the iceberg. And although she was supposed to be unsinkable, with a double bottom, the iceberg had cut her from forward on the starboard side to the engine room, right through her two bottoms.
The ship began to go down. Another survivor, Edith Russell, had been bundled onto one of the few lifeboats. In an interview years later, she remembered looking back at the sinking ship.
We struck the water. I think it was 10 minutes to 2 or 5 minutes to 2. The ship stood there fully lighted, absolutely lighted, music playing. The ocean was just as flat as your bathtub. I never saw a lake quite that flat. Inky black night, starlit, and not a ripple in the sea.
And all of a sudden she lifted up quickly, and you could hear everything crashing through her. Everything that was movable was going through her. And then she went down and seemed to come up again. So I thought, well, now I'm going to leave. And I was hanging on to a board. We had two boards, starboard and port, which said, keep clear of propeller blades. And I was hanging on to one of these, and I was getting higher and higher in the air. And I thought, well, now I'll go. And I dropped in, and I hit the water with a terrific crack. And then I looked up at the Titanic. So the propellers were right out of water, the rudder was right out, and I could see the bottom. And then gradually she glided away, and that was that. That was the last of the Titanic.
Eva Hart was 7 years old in 1912. She too had made it onto one of the lifeboats.
We watched her, and then we gradually saw the bows of the ship sinking, and we could hear all the panic of the people on the decks rushing about looking for a lifeboat, and all the lifeboats had gone. And there were still 1,500 odd people left on board with no possible means of being saved because there weren't any lifeboats. And our Stan was stuck up in the air at a most terrible angle for a while, and then just settled, leaned over and went down. And we saw her sink. We heard the noise, we heard the sound of people drowning, which to me is the most dreadful thing of all.
Almost 3/4 of a century later, what the crew on board the expedition ship the Nore had found was more than a piece of history. It was a grave.
At that moment in time, only those of us on the ship, only 55 people at that moment knew what had just happened. And we were all sort of moved simultaneously to have an impromptu memorial service for those lost souls. We all assembled along the fantail, along the back deck of the ship, and I know Dr. Ballard spoke, and we just expressed, our respect and honor for the people who had lost their lives.
The expedition had discovered the remains of the Titanic, but they'd also begun to lay a mystery to rest. Many people hadn't been able to believe that a ship like that could snap in two. Dr. Robert Ballard and his team showed that it had. For more than a year, they kept the location of the Titanic secret while they surveyed the remains. But since then, many more expeditions have visited it, despite objections from some survivors and their relatives who believe that the site should be left untouched.
Luis Hidalgo with the story of the sinking of the Titanic in 1912 and the ship's discovery in 1985. She was speaking to Kathy Offinger and Jean-Louis Michel, both part of the expedition which eventually found the wreck. Next, we're going back just over 10 years to a pioneering moment in medical history, when the first baby was born to a mother who'd had a womb transplant. Reena Stanton Sharma has spoken to a professor of obstetrics who helped bring baby Vincent into the world.
It's the 4th of September 2014 in Gothenburg, Sweden.
This is the baby boy born to parents who thought they might never have a child of their own. His name is Vincent.
The baby is doing fine, and of course that was fantastic happiness among me and the whole team.
But in the same time, it was a little unreal sensation also, because we really couldn't believe that we had reached this moment.
Little Vincent has helped push back the boundaries of what's possible. He may be the first of many.
And he was. Vincent's birth followed 15 years of research led by Professor Mats Brandström from Sahlgrenska University Hospital, who was speaking in that BBC report. And baby Vincent, who weighed 1.8 kilos, was born early after his mother, Malin Steenberg, had received a donated womb from a family friend more than a year earlier.
After so many years, over a decade, with studies from mouse, rats, sheep, pigs, baboons, humans, the first human live birth, little Vincent was born. It was truly amazing. We were honored, we were humble.
Pernilla Dam Kajella, Professor of Obstetrics and Gynecology at the University Sahlgrenska Academy, was a member of that talented team whose dedication would help bring Vincent into the world. Little Vincent's mum, who was 36, was born without a uterus, the pear-shaped organ, also called a womb, which plays a critical role in menstruation and pregnancy. But finding a donor wasn't that easy, as she told the BBC in 2018.
Finally, one of our friends' mother, she actually offered to do this for us. She's a truly amazing woman to do all this for us. But we also were very lucky because this was 5 years ago now and everything was very successful. We heard him scream, and the minute after I had him on my chest. Yeah, it's an amazing moment that it's very hard to explain. It's almost so I as you can hear, I get some tears in my eyes.
The stakes were high for the doctors carrying out the transplant, which enabled Malin to become a mother.
We knew that we needed to be as good as it possibly could be, because otherwise, if we would not get pregnancies out of this research, it would perhaps end the whole uterus transplantation, not only in Sweden, in Europe, but perhaps also in the world.
Malin was one of 9 women who received womb transplants from living friends or relatives. The women were born without a uterus or had to have it removed because of cervical cancer. At the time, 1 in 5,000 females worldwide were born without a womb.
So the first step is the donor. So we started with very thorough, meticulous to treat the uterus with the vessels and to not injure her, of course, as a donor, and not injure the organ to be transplanted. And then that took 10-12 hours. The uterus, you could say, is almost like your fist. And of course, the uterus that has been donated, you have a thorough examination of the uterus, that it has been proven to bear a child. After you remove the uterus, and you can imagine that the absolute last thing that you do is to cut the vessels. So the uterus or the organ, when you do a transplantation, have to have full optimal circulation all to the end. Because when you cut the vessels, the organ will not get, of course, any blood or oxygen. So when you cut the vessels, then you need to remove it quickly and flush it and put it on ice to minimize the damage of the organ. And then, of course, we closed the donor. And at that time, Malin was already prepared by another team that had opened and prepared the vessels to be sutured in. When that was just like in the next operating theater next door. So now you just, go with a cold flushed organ and you look at the small vessels to see, is there anything that need to be fixed before to put it in? You can see exactly how the vessels looks like. And then you put it in the young female patient, and then you start with the vessels. So that's the first thing you do. And you have it circulated, and then you can suture ligaments and so forth.
It was a success. But Marlin needed drugs to suppress her immune system to make sure that her body didn't reject the womb. A year later, with her partner Klaas, they went through IVF, in vitro fertilization, where her eggs were fertilized in a lab, giving them embryos which were frozen. The next step was to implant one of those embryos.
Marlin and her husband Klaas came for a follow-up, but she said, I don't think I'm pregnant. We said, okay, let's just, check with a urine sample. So she left the urine, and then we sat and talked and waited. And then the nurse came in with the answer on a paper slip. And I said, we can look at it together. And it was positive. And I said, it's positive. What is positive? What is it? What is positive? You're pregnant. I remember it was an amazing moment, and believing and not believing, is it true? It was, of course, like every woman that has a positive pregnancy test is somewhat surprised, happy, afraid, anxious.
Vincent arrived early after almost 32 weeks, but he was perfectly healthy.
And we were so focused and hopeful. It was very similar to any cesarean. Little Vincent was out quickly, screamed, and then we were very happy. and I feel privileged to be part of this process.
10 years later, the boy who'd made history gave a speech in front of a room full of doctors, including Pernilla.
My name is Vincent and I am 10 years old. I'm a regular boy who loves sports, especially golf. My favorite subject in school is picture. When I grow up, I want to be a golf pro. When I was born, people all over the world were excited. But today, I and about 60 other kids like me are just regular children. My mom and dad are here with me today, and I know they and the Swedish team and doctors are very proud of me. I'm very happy that I'm here because all the brave people in this room.
So how did it feel seeing him again?
Super. He says he's just an ordinary boy. He loves sports. When he was born, it gave hope to so many women around the world. Yes.
Professor Pernilla Damkajala, part of the team that made it possible for baby Vincent to be born. She was speaking to Reena Stanton-Sharma. Next, from the fine work that doctors can do in hospitals, we turn to a sport which has a tendency to end up landing people in hospital, boxing. For this week's Sporting Witness, we're going back to Las Vegas in the 1990s, when the Mexican-American boxer Oscar de la Hoya was getting ready to face his toughest test, a clash with Ike Bazooka Corte. Mark Wilberforce relived the bout with the former golden boy of boxing.
The best moment of my entire career was the 12th round in the Ike Corte fight. I remember I knocked him down, he knocked me down, and so going into the 12th round, everybody's saying, the fight is even. You have to win this round.
Oscar de la Hoya was the golden boy of American boxing, Olympic champion, world title holder, a rising icon. But he often faced criticism for the quality of opponents he fought.
I always had that pressure to perform even harder, to fight the best fighters, just because of the criticism I was receiving. So I remember telling my whole team, look, I need a big fight. That's when we got our heads together and we decided, hey, let's fight Ike Corte. This guy's going to give you a hell of a fight.
On the 10th of February 1999, 3 days before the fight, a press conference was held. Las Vegas was familiar grounds for Oscar, but the atmosphere in the media briefing was something he'd never experienced.
There was a lot of noise and drums and people yelling, and there was Ike Corte's posse all around him. I mean, there must have been 50 people around him just having a good time playing drums. It was a lot of fun. I thought that Ike Corte was like a hero in Ghana.
It's fight night in Vegas for the 67-kilogram division. The championship is on the line, and the main event is just minutes away.
I remember being inside the locker room, and I will never forget, 10 minutes before the actual fight takes place, they call you and they say, it's your turn, let's go. And butterflies start flying in your stomach, and you get a little nervous, you know? And so I remember walking down to the ring. The music goes on. I had mariachi playing, which was very traditional for me in every fight. And so I remember just watching all the people, how excited they were. But when you see Ike Cortez coming up, you see him with his entourage. He's like 30 deep. I remember going up to the ring and hearing this band playing like nonstop. And they were ringside, and you couldn't hear the crowd because the band was so loud. This was such a unique experience. Like, everybody was like, wow, this looks like a tough guy.
What was your overall fight plan going into this bout against Ike Cortez?
My strategy was solely to make it a dogfight, to make it entertaining, to shut up the doubters all over the world that, oh, Oscar, can't fight. Oh, he hasn't fought a tough guy, this and that. So I would box a little on my toes. After the second or third round, I noticed that when I would jump on my toes, Ike Cortez couldn't figure me out. So I would throw my jab, bouncing on my toes, and he couldn't block it. So I was like, wait, I kind of discovered something here.
From the first bell, both fighters showed a lot of respect for each other. Then round 6 arrives, and all respect is well and truly gone.
I remember hitting him with one of the hardest left hooks I've ever thrown. Boom. And he drops on his butt, gets back up, shakes it off, and here he comes again with his powerful jab. And then I remember him dropping me. All of a sudden, because I got confident with your guard a little low. Right there and then I said to myself, oh my gosh, okay, this is going to be a long fight. I remember telling myself in that round when I went back to my corner, just have a good time. Because my trainers would always tell me, Oscar, when you are doing your best, you're having a great time in the ring.
I noticed that your head trainer, Robert Alcazar, would often switch between English and Spanish when speaking to you in the corner. Which of the two languages got through to you more in the heat of the battle?
Well, one thing about Robert at the time, he would get so nervous, right? He would give me great instructions in English, and that's when I knew that, okay, Robert has it under control. But when he gets nervous, he starts talking in Spanish. So you can imagine, like, okay, I'm thinking in my head, please don't start talking in Spanish because I know you're nervous, So he's telling me in English, son, go knock him out. And then all of a sudden he tells me in Spanish, son, I love you. And please be careful. And I'm like, don't tell me that. I'll be okay. I remember, I think it might have been the 7th, 8th round. Robert Alcazar was starting to talk in Spanish. I was like, oh no, here we go. What am I doing wrong? Am I losing the fight? Yeah.
Between rounds 9 to 11, Oscar noticed something odd about Cortez's approach.
I remember Ike Cortez changing up his game plan. I believe in the corner they told him, look, you can hit him all day with the right hands. And sure enough, they were right. At the time, I wasn't really aware that I was kind of lowering my left hand a bit, so I was open for the right hand. So started tagging it with right hands, and very powerful right hands. It swelled up my cheek. I remember that, but it was like a badge of honor.
At the end of round 11, Robert Alcazar was speaking Spanish again, while giving Oscar slaps of encouragement. De La Hoya needed to produce the 3 most spirited fighting minutes of his life.
I remember throwing like 30, 40 punches and connecting every single one, and he's still throwing back. And I'm like, oh my, what is this guy made of? And I'm thinking to myself, wait, the referee's going to stop it because he's getting punched, left and right. But the referee's just looking, and I'm like looking to the referee, and I'm punching and looking and punching. And you can imagine the crowd is going crazy. Then the final bell rang, and to me, it was like a Rocky moment. We both raised our hands, and it was just like, wow, thank God it's over. It was a pretty special moment.
Referee Mitch Halpin held off from stopping the fight, and in doing so, allowed a defining moment to unfold.
I was glad Halpern didn't stop it because it left this memorable emotion in millions of people's head. People will always remember that 12th round, how special it was, how action-packed for the both of us. And I can see Icorte's face as well. He felt proud that he hung in there with me, that he dropped me. He felt proud that he was still standing up after 30 unanswered punches in the 12th round. He felt proud. I don't know. I've never been inside the ring feeling that ever again. That was the only moment where I really had to dig deep down inside and really fight for my win.
The bout ended as a split decision. 2 scorecards in favor of De La Hoya and 1 for Corte. A verdict that's still up for debate.
I think it could have gone either way. Does it merit a draw? I think both of us would have actually loved having a draw, but I felt that last 12th round was very crucial in winning the fight. Having to see me in a long 12-round fight where I get dropped, was a first for a lot of people. So I didn't even mind if Icorte would have won. It was that good. It was that close. Once that final bell rings, me as a fighter, I always think, man, I should have done more. I remember we embraced several times just because we had so much respect for each other. It was a rare moment in boxing where it's like you're fighting for your life and tooth and nail, and all of a sudden the bell rings and all you want to do is just hug your opponent, and thank him. Because at that moment, I knew exactly what we just created here. That was history.
Oscar De La Hoya retired from boxing in 2009, but that narrow, grueling win stuck with him. He went on to become CEO of Golden Boy Promotions. He was speaking to Mark Wilberforce. Finally this week, a spot of shopping. For this, we're going back to Lithuania in the early 2000s for the creation of Vinted, the online marketplace specializing in second-hand goods. It now has millions of members around the world. Rachel Naylor has spoken to its co-founder.
It's about 2 a.m, sometime in August 2008, and we're at a house party in Lithuania. 21-year-old Milda Mudkute has just moved out of her mum's into a flat in the capital, Vilnius. And she's moaning to everyone about how many belongings she has.
Oh my God, I have so much stuff. There were lots of stuff. I counted about 300 items in total. Shoes, dresses, skirts, trousers, jeans and everything. And I realized, that I can take only 100 because my new closet in my new apartment is 3 times smaller.
Then she has a brainwave.
I was, most of the items, they're still with labels or worn once or twice, and that's it. And they were brand new, basically. And for me it was, I'm 21, I need some money, and was the idea, I can sell to some friends, I can earn some money, and then I can buy more, and can buy from other people, from other closets as well.
She tells her mate Eustace Janauskas her idea.
I was actually super convinced that every girl has the same issue as I do. Eustace was totally the opposite. So he said, seriously, people have more than 5 pair of shoes? I was yes, of course. So I have only 5 pair of shoes just for winter. And for him, it was a huge surprise. And then since we were in a big party, Eustace said, okay, so let's go just to make the test. And he just walked to the door, after the door, and said, oh, can you come to me? I want to ask you some questions. And he just found some, 5-10 girls in a party. And he said, of course I would use that. And I was amazing idea. And for him, Eustace, okay, let's do it together. We made the plan when we're going to meet next. We had the next day during the lunchtime. We said we meet and we need to decide the name of the project that we have.
And that name was?
Manodrabuži.lt. So mano, it means mine. Drabuži, it means clothing.
And within 2 weeks, Milda and Eustace had built a website.
It was boom, super fast. And if I would do it now, I would expect to be more professional. But maybe we should invest into design. Maybe we should think about what members want, what kind of features it should have. At that time, the key thing, we just want to launch it and to be it live. That's it.
But in their haste and enthusiasm,
we even forgot to develop the button, I want to buy this item. My friends, they're texting me and they're saying, but this is just a catalog to watch. If I want to buy, how can I buy them? I was oh, shoot. So, and we said, okay, wait a minute. I called to Eustace and Eustace, okay, give me 30 minutes. I will do that.
With the buy button sorted, their site was up and running. and Milda sold about 40 items of her clothing in the first week.
I realized, okay, just to have more buyers in the future, we need to have more listers, more sellers. So I wrote email. In our days, it would be called a spam, I would say. Like, in 2008, it was super normal practice. But I wrote, guys, I have super wonderful idea. Could you please upload some more stuff? Because I believe in this idea. And I sent, for 20, 30 people. And then magic happened. Like in 1 hour, instead of people uploading the items, the radio stations, online news portals started to call us and oh, could you tell us about your project? I was like, what?
This is Milda speaking on LRT radio in 2009. She's saying that because fashions change, we get bored of our clothes. And that with her site, you now have the chance to refresh your wardrobe.
So it seems I had some good friends who just made the first word of mouth, and instead of collecting more items in the catalog, we got lots of attentions.
And thanks to the publicity, memberships kept growing, and they launched a version of their site in Germany called Kleiderkreisel, or KK, meaning closed circle.
We were super active couchsurfing, where you can go to foreign countries and you can say, I want to sleep in your place, and you don't pay anything. You have extra room and you can just give it for free. There were 2 German girls, Sophia and Susan. They came to Justa's house Friday or Saturday at night. It was 5 a.m. or something. So they come back from the party and they found Justa's coding. And they asked, so what are you doing here? And he said, oh, I have some kind of project. And he explained. And those 2 ladies said, oh my God, we need this project in Germany. And then Justa said, but we have zero money. We cannot offer anything to you. And they said, we don't care. We need this project because it would work in Germany. And Justa said, okay, let's do it. So this is how it works.
In 2011, businessman Mantis Mikutskas came on board.
He said, I think that you still don't realize what you have created. I think that also, Justas and I, we had stigma about what Lithuanians can create and offer to the world. Even Germany, for us, it looked more like an accident. I think that we were too afraid to dream about that. And Mantas, he came from outside and he said, guys, I think you don't know what you're talking about. We should go global.
And so they did. Hiring a team and launching an app in 2012.
We entered France and Poland. Both of the markets were also instant hit for us. We were super afraid to go to the new markets because this is the moment of truth. Can you do that or not? Or was just the accident just to be that lucky? So it was lots of celebrations there in the office.
They also went on to launch in the US in 2013 and the UK in 2014, rebranding as Vinted. But in a bid to make more money,
I would say one of the biggest mistakes that we did in Vinted history. So we did commission fee. And actually, it was pretty high. It was different from each market, but it was from 11% to 19%. So 19% is it's a lot. And of course, we weren't that good at communicating why we are doing this. So it was all the members, they were fighting. And if you would see the account, profile picture, it was KK is bad. KK is, I don't want to use bad words here, but it was lots of starting from F. And it was a disaster. Oh, our word of mouth, our organic growth, almost zero. It was instantly almost zero. And we had the time in 2016 where we said, okay, we have about 7-8 months to survive. If we do nothing, we're going to die.
Cue Thomas Plantenga, a Dutch executive who was brought in 2016 as a consultant. He scrapped the high commission fees and suggested advertising on TV.
And I was seriously, our generation, they don't watch TV. And then Thomas said, no, guys, I think that we should try. And he finally convinced us to do the super conservative test in, I guess it was in France, for a couple of weeks.
Le mouvement Vinted, c'est vous. Vous êtes convaincu qu'il est possible de trouver l'inspiration chez quelqu'un d'autre, même à l'autre bout de la France.
And it was a boom. It was insane.
A few months later, Milda left the company when she had her first child. In 2019, Vinted became Lithuania's first unicorn, a private startup company valued at over $1 billion. And 4 years later, it became the first major second-hand marketplace to make a profit.
I feel, somehow with the age, and I also have 4 kids now, I'm starting to think about, climate, about the world. And for me, it's now actually the key reason is I want my kids and my grandparents and the rest of the, society that they would live in a green world. So what we also see from our research or some people that I talk, so they say, I got used to sell everything that I cannot even think about throwing them out because I want to resell everything. So, this is the shift that we made. Of course, it took like lots of years, but I'm proud of this shift that we are creating and what we did.
And do you still use it?
Of course. Oh, yeah. Then you have kids, it's impossible. So we also have some rules in our home. If the kids want some plastic things, it should come from Vinted. I say, you have 10 minutes to browse, so they know everything, how to make favorites. We are like very against phones and everything, but for Vinted, they know how to use it.
Vinted now has more than 500 million items listed for sale across 23 countries, and the company behind the site is worth an estimated $5 billion. Mildemit Kutte remains a shareholder. She was speaking to Rachel Naylor. And with that story of a highly successful move towards recycling, we've come to the end of this edition of the History Hour. We don't throw anything away, incidentally. All the items you hear are carefully logged and curated on our website. Thousands of first-hand stories from the past. Find them all by visiting the Witness History website. And I'll be back with another collection next week, so until then, this is Max Pearson. From all of us here, thanks for listening. Goodbye.
A moment in time captured by what they heard.
I heard some people making phone calls.
Okay, which runway would you like at Teterboro? We're going to begin that.
What they saw.
I put my head down. I saw the movie of my life start going through my head.
What they smelt.
I still remember the smell of the fresh fish.
And I completely lost my appetite.
Moments captured which last for a lifetime.
Scientists have made the atomic bomb.
That sort of flash set on fire the birds, and they all fell down without their feathers on.
The way was clear for Hitler to realize all his demonic plans.
Stories from people with first-hand accounts of events that have shaped our world.
At the end, Kissinger called me into his office and he said, "You did a good job." I left the office with tears in my eyes.
She called me and told me, "I'm doing Studio 54. She had already become a star in Paris. She came back a superstar.
Listen now. Search for Witness History wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Hi, I'm Simon Jack.
I'm Zing Sing.
And Good Bad Billionaire is back for a new season.
Delving into the lives and livelihoods of more of the world's billionaires.
Like the owner of Russia's largest online retailer, Wild Berries. She's Russia's first self-made female billionaire, Tatiana Kim.
The action movie icon and former governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
And the co-founder of Snapchat, a billionaire at just 25 years old, Evan Spiegel.
Simon and I are asking you to decide if they're good, bad, or just another billionaire.
That's Good Bad Billionaire from the BBC World Service.
Listen now wherever you get your BBC podcasts.